All right, everyone, we're now live on Facebook, and welcome to today's session on branding tips and tricks. Uh, for those of you who are watching on Facebook, I just want to give a little plug for the source of this t-shirt. I've been thinking of you. There's some really great bookish, book nerd sort of t-shirts. You can find them at outofprint.com. Even Mark Griffin, my husband, has ordered one. So for those who would like to participate in ISBN nerd culture, outofprint.com is where you can get your shirt too. All right, so I'm going to share a slide pack. All right. And if I could just get some confirmation from those of you here with me in Zoom that you can see the slides, and then I'll get going. Yes, good. Wonderful. Thanks, everyone. So for me, the biggest secret to having a decent brand or design, whether we're talking about your website, your blog, your social, your email newsletter, your business cards, whatever it might be, the biggest secret by far, I think, is being very simple and even minimalist with your approach. I think that we tend to get excited when we have a lot of choices with our tools. And many of the tools we have today while they make design really easy, easier than ever before, they also give you a lot of choices. And more choice usually means more confusion and more opportunities to screw up. So I'm presenting today as someone who's not a designer at all. Although I took a couple design classes in college, I'm not a designer. But someone who has worked with designers, worked in lots of different areas of publishing and digital media, and I've learned a few things over time. So if you've subscribed to my newsletters or if you've read my site, then you have experienced basically designs of my own creation. I don't have anyone who designs for me. It's all done by myself. And I think it's pretty serviceable. I mean, it doesn't rise to the level of professional polished design, but it works. And I don't have to consult a designer every time I need to design something new because I have some established principles in place. And the first principle is always, let's just keep it simple. Let's keep it pretty minimalist and straightforward because it keeps you as a non-designer out of trouble. So what do I mean by minimalist? Well, if I show you, I'll start by just showing you a homepage for an entrepreneur named Tara McMullen. And she's someone who has a very minimalist approach on her site. You can see that there's not an image even, except up in the upper left-hand corner. It's more of a symbol or an icon rather than an image. It's black text on a white background. It doesn't get much more simple than that. And it's effective. It's effective for what she wants to do. So there is nothing, I think, low rent about this design at all. I think it achieves its purpose and it looks great. It's easy to read, and that's what she wants you to do. She wants you to read. And I think this is the advantage that many writers and authors have. It's that when people are engaging with you or looking at your materials or reading your blog, you usually want them to read. So having this minimalist approach, I think, is, usually accomplishes the most important thing for you. The next big secret, I think, is to be really careful with image use. Images, like they say, a picture's worth 1,000 words. Any images you use, whether it's a photograph, an illustration, something else, you're immediately introducing an aesthetic, a certain color palette, certain design direction. It speaks so much about branding, any sort of imagery that you use. And then when you combine those images with text, you start to get into really complicated design choices and things where you almost need the training of a professional designer to marry together text and images well. Now, there are tools out there that help you with this, like Canva is one. I'll talk about that a little later. So they do make it easier to combine text and images. Just understand that as soon as you start doing that, you're really dramatically increasing the complexity of what you're trying to achieve. And if you're not a designer, it makes it harder to succeed. So for instance, at my site, if you've scanned it at all, you'll notice that I tend to keep text and images pretty separate. I'm really cautious with using imagery, and it's because I'm not a designer, and I don't want to have a non-professional look. So I'll show you an example of this. This is from a website critique session I did some months ago, where Joanna had submitted her site for critique. And in the header of the site, like many authors, like she's like so many she's done with her author website what so many authors do, which is they put their name on top of an image in that header area at the very top of the site. So this is one of the most complicated things you can try to achieve, is marrying together text with an image and have them look like they go together, not just in terms of design and aesthetics, but also in terms of colors and making sure things are readable. So this has issues that need to be resolved. It's hard to read, and there's some other qualities of the site that make this probably a poor choice of text and image combination. So just realize when you do this sort of thing, that's the point at which you might want to consider, I'm going to hire a designer to do this. If you want to combine text and images, think about hiring a professional to help. So as I've indicated, putting text on a color field, whether it's an image or even just a single color, unless it's white, it's pretty complicated. And then combining colors, that again increases the complication. So let me show you an example. This is Susan Cook's site, which, there's a lot of good information here and a lot of key components of author websites that we want. But it's also trying to combine a lot of different things. I would say 3 different aesthetics are going on here. We've got the image at the top, this kind of outer space aesthetic. And then we've got her author photo, which is more professional. We've got the family photo with the word cloud, which is yet another aesthetic. And then we've got the email newsletter sign up, which is really bold, vibrant colors, which aren't in the same color palette as the other images. So we have several different aesthetics here battling it out on the homepage. And so that's what I mean when I talk about when you combine text and images, you're massively increasing like how these things have to work together to show a cohesive brand or have a cohesive message. So for this sort of site, the first thing I would think about is, do we really need the header image? Can we think about a different sort of color palette for the email newsletter sign up that's not so loud, unless that's the color scheme you want for your whole site? Do we want that word cloud that introducing all those additional colors? So those are the sorts of questions I'd be asking about a homepage with all of these elements on it. When you use color anywhere, I've been talking about websites, but this really applies to just about anything you do. It could apply to your business card. You want to choose your colors with purpose. And so what do I mean by that? It mainly means don't choose in the moment what looks good. You want to have some consistency, and you want to be choosing it so that it ties into something else. Like, you may not yet feel that you have a brand or aesthetic, and that's okay. But you want to start thinking about, at least, what do I consistently want to choose for this purpose? There are, especially in digital media, there are certain colors that you can choose consistently again and again. They go by 6-digit hex codes, as you can see illustrated here on the slide. And once you identify one of these 6-digit hex colors, you can start inputting it just about everywhere. It could be on your website, your blog, your email newsletter, even some social media accounts allow you to customize the colors associated with your profile. So this is a really powerful thing you can do, is to just decide, hey, this is the hex color I'm going to use for my names, for my profiles, for accent colors, and just go back to those colors again and again and again. Now, if you have a book out, that might guide your choice of which hex colors you want to be using. So for example, if I wanted to create some colors associated with my Publishing 101 book, there are so many tools out there where you can upload an image like your book cover, and it will then generate several different choices of a color palette for you to use. And so I uploaded Publishing 101 to, I think it was the Color at Adobe site, and it generated these options for me, a dull version and a vibrant version. And you can, there's so many ways to generate palettes. I'm giving you 3 choices here, the Adobe site, and another site, Degrave, if I'm probably not pronouncing that right, and then Pictaculus. But there are lots of choices out there, and you can get these palettes for free. And you can try regenerating them too, again and again and again. I mean, part of this is just AI driven. So you can run it until you get a palette that you like. So book covers are one way to get the ball rolling. You could use your author photo if you have nothing else, if you have a really nice professional author photo. So like if you're wearing a blue shirt or a red dress, or it's, I don't know, like there's some distinctive colors in the author photo, you could generate a palette from that. So there's not really a right or a wrong answer here. It's really more about consistency and making a choice and then sticking with that choice. So speaking for myself, I have a header at my site that is really just my name. And it uses a green color that I repeat really frequently. So if I were to hand you my business card, it would use that same font and it would use that same color. I use that green accent color throughout the site. It's in my email newsletter, etc. So the other thing that I've done is the font that you see used with my name, that's Georgia. I really like Georgia. It is not a unique font by any means. I think it's developed by Microsoft. But it's really, it's well available. Like no matter where you go, often you can find Georgia as one of the choices. So in my email newsletter, I use Georgia. On my website and my blog, I use Georgia. A lot of the things that you might receive from me use Georgia. It's just really easy once you have that choice, that font you like, to keep using it again and again. I like Georgia and I use it because I think it has a nice classic timeless look. It's also very readable. But I do have, on occasion, I use what are called display fonts. So Georgia is a reading font. You could use it as a display font, but usually when we talk about display fonts, we're talking about things that are used for large type, like big display, like billboard type of display. So the stuff that appears really large on your site or business card or in header positions, meaning they're not for reading, they're for display. So I do sometimes use display fonts, but it's pretty rare. Often you'll see both designers and authors alike having a display font that is really decorative, like it might be a cursive even, or it might be a sans serif, and then they will contrast that with the reading font, which is, you know, more classic, or if they used a sans serif for the display font, they'll use a serif for the reading font, or vice versa. So in any event, just knowing having those 2 choices or making those 2 choices, like with the colors, starts to create consistency and eliminate a lot of this kind of wandering that one might do when you create something new. You don't have to think about what fonts you're going to use. You know, you can go straight to your brand font. So when you're choosing that reading font, I just want to emphasize again that we're looking for something readable. A lot of times I find people choosing fonts that are too small. Sans serif can be harder to read, but it just depends on which font you're choosing. It can be totally acceptable. It just depends. Again, if you're an author or a writer who wants people to read your stuff on your site, or if you want people to read your newsletter, it's generally better to have really dark type on a light background. So this is where you probably don't want to be introducing a lot of colors into play. Like, I can't tell you how much I dislike personally reading a site where the type is not some black or gray variation, like someone has chosen blue or green or red. It just really increases the difficulty of the reading experience. Now you could do that with the display font, but it's really hard to do with the reading font and make it pleasant for reading over a few minutes. And then also think about generous leading. So this is the amount of space that appears between your lines of text. Sometimes people have this leading set too tight, or the design template they're using has it really tight. I encourage you to open it up, especially if the lines of text are nearly touching, they're probably too close together. If you're not sure what good leading is, just go to your favorite news site or go to medium.com and you'll see there kind of a leading that's really comfortable and made for reading. If you're looking for fonts to choose from, Google Fonts is an amazing repository of free fonts. And the benefit here is if you choose a Google font, it's likely to be available in just about any service that you use. So if you're using Canva, for example, a lot of that library is driven by Google Fonts. You can find Google Fonts associated with a lot of WordPress themes and other design tools for websites and blogs. I wouldn't recommend getting too custom with your font because, again, it just increases the complexity. It means that the site has to load with that font in place, and there are all sorts of questions that start to get raised when you work with what I would call like a proprietary font, a font that you have to purchase. It might not be available everywhere you would need it. So to the extent you can, stick with the fonts that are widely available, and you're not going to have to wonder, when I try to do X, am I going to be able to use this font? You don't want to be like managing fonts and installing and all of that nonsense. So choose something widely available if you can. So now we come to another issue that I don't know that everyone realizes how powerfully this affects the reading experience. And that's the hierarchy of the text in your newsletter, on your blog, on your site, even on a business card. So generally the text hierarchy should be such that the biggest size, like 50 point or 60 point, maybe if that's the biggest size, is at the top. And then it gets smaller as we go down the page. You might have like a header or subheads that appear and they're going to be larger, but you would never use a size of font that's bigger than what appeared at the top. So we'd like to see this really nice hierarchy of, and as far as smaller elements on the page, like captions or footnotes or things that aren't the main body copy, they're generally smaller, or they're in a lighter color, or they're somehow differentiated so that we can see and feel that hierarchy on the page. So once you've chosen the fonts, the colors, the leading that you like, then it's up to you to be consistent with your deployment. So you need to make sure that, for instance, you go into MailChimp and you create a template that has all of these defaults set so that you're not using MailChimp's defaults. I can tell you exactly what MailChimp's font and color defaults are because a lot of people don't change them. So MailChimp defaults to a gray Arial with this hideous blue link color. So I always know when I've received a newsletter from someone who doesn't know enough to change the MailChimp default style, because that's exactly what their newsletter looks like. Now, there are some systems where you can't really change much about the design or the display. Like if you're doing a Substack newsletter, if you're on Medium, like you're going to be constrained. They're not going to allow you to experiment. And for the most part, that is a great thing. Like they have already designed those things within an inch of their life, and you can safely stick with their choices. But of course, once you get into MailChimp or social media posting, you're on your own and you're not constricted. So again, having some of these rules or principles in place will start to create a consistent look and feel across everything that you're doing. Another thing that I do that I've found very effective for my site is repeating design elements and shapes. So at janefriedman.com, my main site, ages ago, I kind of staked my preference for the circle. And if you visit my site, you'll see these circle elements repeated on just about every page in some form. So even at the top corner of the page, there's always circle icons pointing to working with me and my bio page. On the home page, there are circle icons pointing to the 3 most important areas of my site. On the work with me page, there are 3 different icons in circles, etc., etc. So I keep it pretty straightforward, as you can see. I do incorporate color on occasion, but not always. Again, you have to be careful when you incorporate that color, because if the colors clash, it leaves people feeling a little bit off center. I do diverge from some of the rules and parameters that I've set. Everyone diverges at one time or another. So for instance, in my Electric Speed newsletter, it's not the same header that's at my website. It's a little bit different. It uses a different font to convey, the nature of the newsletter, which is digital media tools and resources. So the font that Electric Speed is in is a little different than something I would use elsewhere. It's a display font. It's not the font that's used in the reading portion of the newsletter. But notice that I've kept Jane Friedman in the same font as usual, the Georgia font. And I'm still using this green color. The green's a little bit more electric here. It's a little bit more vibrant, which is on purpose. But notice I've still got the circle. And so we have these echoes of the design aesthetic I've chosen still coming through. All right. So when I started this discussion, I mentioned that the biggest secret is keeping things simple and minimalist. And a lot of that has to do with not trying to do too much at once and being really sensitive to the hierarchy that you're creating, whether that's the hierarchy in your newsletter or site or something else. So to give you an example of where things can go wrong is when you start adding a lot of columns to your site or to your newsletter. It's very easy to create columns with most website and email newsletter templates. It's not like in and of itself a bad thing, but it tends to lead to really bad design decisions. And you get things like this. So this is Jeff Ryan's site from some time ago when we were working together on a project. And we have a lot of great information here, but it's hard to see what should take priority because there's so many different things going on. There isn't a hierarchy to the information being presented. It's all kind of presented equally. And then to complicate matters, we've got text overlaid on images, and the text is not that easy to read. So that's getting lost. So those are 2 issues here that are preventing this homepage from communicating effectively. Here it's a very similar situation as Jeff's site, where we've got a lot of different columns essentially going on. We do have a better hierarchy, like it feels very structured. So we have the big header on top, and then we have 2 main boxes, and then we've got 5 boxes. But it's still a lot to take in. And we've also got light text, white text on different colored backgrounds, which automatically makes it a little bit harder to read. So you have to be really cautious when you do that. This is, when I see it, I just take a I can feel myself relax. It's probably partly due to the image itself and to the colors and to the language. It all goes together really nicely. And it's like I can take it all in without wondering what I'm missing. And it's a very simple design, very simple and very effective. You can see that the colors are all working together. It's all built off this image. Different, there's a very distinctive palette. We're not deviating from that palette. My guess is that the fonts, the colors of the fonts were probably pulled from the image. We've got nice hierarchy of the text. And we see what's taking priority, like this message here is taking priority. So there's not a lot of competing elements. So when you're thinking about designing anything, think about it in terms of horizontal blocks if you can, rather than columns. Again, columns are it's difficult to deal with. Anything with lots of things in a grid is going to amplify the complexity and lead to possibly bad choices. So if you can think about this too in terms of what do you most prioritize or what do you want people to see, and then going down the list rather than trying to put them all next to each other. I do use Canva for social media posting and also, just for creating marketing images, one-time use sort of images. I'm going to go and show you my Canva account and some of the things that I've created using Canva. So give me just a second. All right. So right now we are in my class promotions Canva design. And this is something where to keep myself consistent, all of my class marketing and promotions go right into the same bucket. And what I do is that I simply duplicate the design when I'm ready to create a new one. I'm using the same fonts and often similar colors, but you'll notice there's definitely a family look here. And a lot of it's driven by the fact that it's the same fonts, it's the same layout. And so when I'm ready to have something new, I simply click on the duplicate page and I can take away the photo. I can put in the new class title and so on. So this, again, this really, rather than try and grab a new template from over here and make it different each time, I build on what I already have and keep the family look. Let's see what else. What else have I got in here that I can show you? I've started doing more Instagram posting where I get the images from Canva. And so this, the blessing and the curse of Canva is that they give you so many templates to choose from. And a lot of those templates are going to have zero to do with your own branding or your own aesthetic. So like over here on the left, there are so many different choices with different types of fonts and images and colors. And, maybe if you're just doing a one-off that has no relationship to anything else, maybe it's going to work for you. But I find that it's harder to make these work for me because they're not using Georgia font, they're not using the green. It just doesn't fit anything that I do. So what my solution is to start with white, to start with the bare minimum, have a white background and then black text on top of it, like so. I did steal that from the Canva library. I went into the text and I chose this because I just thought it was a nice vivid display font. Notice I was very reserved in my use of it, just used it for the word stop. And then these are some slides that are going to be part of a presentation I'm giving next week. And so I just took the slide headlines and content and dumped it right onto the square. Have little icons. I'll show you where these come from in a second. And kept it very simple, very readable. It doesn't have to be fancy to look good and to help people. So often we're trying to do way too much. Now, if I were trying harder, admittedly, I was not trying that hard. I was more interested in offering information. Maybe I would export these icons or grab the icons in a way that uses my signature green. That would be nice. Certainly, I could put, if I wanted to, I could put my own name or logo down here, but I'm not that concerned about having my logo on stuff. It's on my account. That's good enough. So where did these logos come from? Now, if I really love a site called Noun Project, it is an enormous repository of all sorts of icons, and really icons is not doing it justice. I mean, some of these are really wonderful illustrations. And so they tend to come in families. So there are specific artists or illustrators who contribute to Noun Project. And they tend to have a family feel, or they might be in a particular library of these are all the images you need for like a photography website or for a medical information website, etc. Now, all of these are free to an extent. Like under Creative Commons, you can use them without paying under certain conditions. If you become a paid member of Noun Project, you're going to have more flexibility with the designs, and you can customize the icons. So meaning you can apply colors. So there's some explanation here if you're more interested in Noun Project. Now, Noun Project is not the only place to get icons, but I've found it. It's just a delight to use this site, and I've never gone wrong. Another place, if I want to be paying consistently, I found Deposit Photos very useful for finding things, especially if I want to start like, if I'm trying to create an aesthetic for a line of products. So for example, recently I downloaded this set of illustrations that I'm going to be using for webinars. And these are all, this might not make sense to some of you, but they're all vector images, which means that they can be resized. They can be used very small, they can be used very big. They're very flexible. And they can be used in just about any design program. You can import them into Canva and so on. So I've already used some of these images already. I've used them for this query letter masterclass. I use it for this blogging strategy webinar. So I'm slowly trying to be a little more consistent with the online class marketing imagery that I'm using, so that when people see these promotions out in the world, out in the wild, it starts to become recognizable as a class that I'm offering. So to give you an idea of the price, what I just showed you, the Deposit Photos, that only cost me $1. Like it's dirt cheap. And they have lots and lots and lots of icon packs and illustration packs just like this. Okay, so I'm going to stop the share and go back to my slide presentation. So before I open this up to questions, and feel free to, for those joining me on Zoom, you can pop your questions right into the Q&A box. As far as when you should hire a professional, if you're doing a book cover, if you're self-publishing and you need a book cover design, hire a professional to do that. I mean, I do know many self-publishing authors are able to get a decent cover out of Canva. In fact, there's also a site called BookBrush that's very popular with self-publishing authors who are creating book covers. These are great tools. I think a book cover is too high stakes to try and handle yourself unless you're just kind of in an experiment phase. So I really encourage you to get a professional design. There are affordable designers out there for self-publishing authors that'll charge you $300 to $500 for a cover. Damon Zaw is one that I often recommend. Another thing that can be super helpful, especially once you have a book coming out, is to get a professional author headshot. So, to get a headshot from a local photographer, it's probably not going to run you more than a few $100s at most. You may even be able to get it for $50 or $100. It just depends on how complicated your requirements are. So I also advocate that for when you have an important event launch coming up. If you want to market yourself for speaking engagements, it can be super useful. If you feel you're at a critical moment in your author business or your entrepreneurial life, you may want to hire someone to help you revamp your author brand look and feel. As we've gone through this session, for example, if you've kind of panicked or felt anxiety about choosing colors or choosing fonts, if you feel like you have zero talent for this sort of thing, I get it. And you can hire someone to help you make those choices for you. If there's something really specific you're trying to achieve, there's a certain look that you're trying or a certain way you're trying to communicate through colors and fonts and images, then you may want to hire a designer to help you accomplish that. And then once you have all of the parameters set, you can then replicate it yourself. And then website design, it can be quite expensive, like often $2,000 is kind of the baseline for like a from scratch website design. I don't typically recommend it, but if you have a really important book launch coming out and your site looks like crap, you might benefit from someone cleaning it up, polishing it, and then again, giving you some guidelines to follow so that you can ensure anything else you do has a consistent look. All right, so I'm going to check out the Q&A box. Let me see what we've got. Anita says that registering trademarks is expensive, yes. And how important is it to protect your business name with a trademark? It's not something that I have pursued. Certainly when I worked at a traditional publishing house, we did trademark some of the really key intellectual property brand names like Writer's Market, Writer's Digest. So publications that carry really significant value and that other people could potentially profit from in a bad way or an illicit way. But generally, I don't recommend trademarking, and unless there are a lot of other things that are going in place. Like if you're already consulting with a lawyer, if you're already consulting with someone to set up an LLC or an S corp, if you're already professionalizing a lot of different aspects of your company, whatever that company might be, then maybe you would get a trademark. But to me, a trademark means real commitment. So for most authors, I don't know that a trademark is necessary or even desirable. Keep in mind that you can't copyright or really trademark a title until it becomes a brand in some respects. So like Harry Potter series, for example, would be an example. But most series or books don't approach that level of necessitating a trademark. David says, I've paid for a suite of themes. And what are the pros and cons of relying on these for a brand? Well, I would say step one, and I should probably explain for those who aren't familiar what David might mean by a suite of themes. So my assumption, and David can correct me if I'm wrong, is that he's bought into a WordPress theme system like StudioPress or Vantage, Genesis themes, iThemes. There are all these like theme companies out there that have like a library of themes you can choose from. And they tend to have a lot of similarities, but also slight differences. Like this one is for a restaurant, this one's for a doctor, this one's for an author. So I'm assuming we're talking about that sort of a theme suite. So job number one is to pick the theme that you want to commit to. And hopefully that theme has some customization available. I'm guessing if you paid for it, then it does. And so you can customize the fonts, you can customize the colors. And actually, I think I might, let me stop the share for a moment here and just give you a taste of what that looks like. And I'm going to use the hot sheet site for this. So hot sheet is the email newsletter that I run. It's the paid newsletter. I'm going to go into the theme selections. And hold on, I need to share what I'm doing. There we go. So I'm in the back end of the hot sheet website. This is a WordPress-based site that uses a theme called Generate Press. I highly recommend Generate Press, by the way. I think it's a really nice starter theme for just about any site. You can also upgrade to the premium version for even better customization. But if you're customizing the site in Generate Press, and this is true of just about any theme you might use, you can go right into these selections to modify the typography, the fonts, and the colors. So you can see here that I can determine what fonts are going to be used. Right now it's set on inherit for reasons I won't go into, but I could easily change it. Here under body, there's my favorite, Georgia. I even use it for the hot sheet. I can also, let's see. Oh, here's the colors. And so there are all the color settings. And so I can modify these however I wish. So when you have link colors, for example, on your website, that's a really nice one to customize to match your branding. So those are the places I would go first when you're customizing your theme. Go straight for the typography and the colors. And then usually things tend to fall into place after that. Okay, I'm going to stop the share and go back to the questions. So I didn't actually directly answer David's question because it raised some points I wanted to make. But his question is, what are the pros and cons of relying on these for a brand? And I don't see any problem with it at all. I mean, every theme gets used by thousands and thousands and thousands of people, but it's really unusual for two sites to look alike, even if they're using the same theme. So there are usually enough customizations that are going to make a big difference to how it's perceived. And typography and colors alone make a big difference, as does the header that you put on the site. So my website at janefriedman.com uses a theme called Vantage. It's been around for 5 years minimum, if not longer, and it's used by tens of thousands of people. But I don't think my site looks, just like everyone else's. I think often those sorts of concerns get overplayed. Anne says, I'm working on redesigning my site. And in another Sunday sermon, I talked about, doing site redesigns. I believe this was the Gutenberg site discussion. So how did you do it in the background so that your current site remains live until you're ready to reveal the new site? She says, my web host cannot make a staging site for me to use. So what I do, and I'm going to go and share again my site. Give me just a second. Here we go. So here's my website. I'm going to go into the back end here. So if you can't have a staging area, meaning staging is where you get to do whatever you want to your site in secret, and then you get to push it live when you're done with all the changes. So if your web host doesn't have staging capabilities and you have to make changes live, usually what you do is you just go into your pages, the pages as, wherever it is that you create new pages for your site. And you should be able to duplicate pages, or you can otherwise go into the page and do a massive copy paste. So I could go in here if I decided I needed to change this dramatically. And I can do a huge copy paste into the new page if I'm going to do it on a page by page basis. Now, if you want to change, well, let me explain this more. Like if you're keeping more or less the same theme. and you're just changing the pages and how they look and operate. If you want to change the theme, then you have a little bit of leeway where you can go, I'm going to do this on a different site and not my not my live Jane Friedman site. Let's try, which site do I want to use as the guinea pig here? I think Hotsheet will probably be okay. So if Anne, you want to change themes and you can't stage it, that's when you get into trickier territory. So for instance, you can load up alternate themes into WordPress. I hope this is true of whatever system you're using. And then you can do a live preview. So let's say I was going to switch from Generate Press over to this other theme. I can do a live preview. It's going to show me what it looks like without any changes whatsoever, just doing a basic swap of the theme. You can see that it looks terrible. Like this is going to be a really hard theme to transition to. Some themes are harder than others to make the switch, like some outfits fit better than others. This is a really bad one to be switching to, given what I've got designed. So, that's one of the reasons that you may need to create duplicate pages. Because if you're switching to a theme that behaves really differently, you may have to stage all those pages in draft form before you switch over to the new theme, if that makes sense. So let's see what happens if I try this one instead. Make. It's loading. Okay. We can already see this theme is a little bit of an easier swap. It's making a lot more sense than that other theme. So, and one of the considerations I'd have in mind is how can I make this theme change as seamless as possible and decrease the amount of work that's involved. So once you've found the theme that you're switching to, you can then make all sorts of customizations right now, right here. And if you have to make a lot of changes and customizations, you may need to prepare to be sitting down at your computer for several hours. And then once you're happy with how things look, you can then activate and publish. This is not how professionals do it. This is a workaround. It's certainly not the ideal way of working. But if you have a website that is fairly limited in scope, let's say it's 5 or 6 pages, the design is fairly straightforward. You can switch themes in this way without having a staging site if you work quickly and you make all of these changes on your own and you don't have to save your progress and come back later. So that's one of the drawbacks of this is you can't exactly save your progress. You have to do it in one fell swoop and then activate and publish. Now, this brings me to like a larger issue, which is if you're on a website host that doesn't offer staging, that's not ideal when you're trying to do this sort of work. So I would encourage anyone who's thinking about a website revamp. At the same time, you may want to consider changing hosts so that your new host will give you the ability to stage changes, work on them over time, and then go live with them so that you don't get stuck in this position again. All right. So let's see. I am going to just speak briefly about what's coming up next. Let me do a screen share again. So I have where my Sunday sermons go? Here we go. So the next Sunday sermon is going to be in 3 weeks, and it's going to be a conversation with author Martha Woodruff. So this is the first time I've actually brought in someone else into a Sunday sermon, but one of the reasons I'm doing it is because an issue that's come up really frequently in the last half year, and it's always been an issue, but I've noticed it especially in the last half year. People are worried that it's too late to write and publish their book, or that they're too old, or there's lots of fear associated with time running out. So Martha Woodruff published her first novel at the age of 67, and I've invited her to talk about what that was like, what she's doing now, and she's an incredibly inspiring, energetic, vivacious person. And I think she has a lot of wonderful wisdom to share with others, regardless of age. But we will be also directly looking at the issue of age and how that might be affecting your thought process and your creative practice for better or worse. And then I do have some paid sessions coming up. If you're interested in information on how to research agents and publishers, if you're planning to pitch your book in the next few months, you might benefit from that session where I'm going to go deep into places like Duotrope, Query Tracker, Publishers Marketplace, and show you how I research agents and publishers and how I determine who's a good agent, who's a good publisher. And then later, we're going to have a session with Dr. Kelly Figueroa Ray about permissions. So if you're wondering about, do you need permission for this piece of work before you quote it? Does it fall under fair use? Is it in the public domain? We're going to be going over all those issues. So as I went through that, I see a few other questions have come up. A couple from Anne to follow up on the prior discussion. Anne asks, what about using a staging plugin? Is that a good idea? Last time I looked at staging plugins, I did not find them satisfactory, mainly because they were really complicated to use. Now, this has been a few years ago, so it's possible that staging plugins have advanced and become easier since I last looked. If so, by all means, use one. Like if you can figure out how to use one, use one. But I didn't find one that I was comfortable installing and using for a staging operation. And Yolanda asks, out of pure curiosity, why do you ask for people's address when they sign up for the Sunday sermons? Is there an advantage to that? So yes, there are two issues at play here. One is the security of the Sunday sermon. So I don't want to publicize the link. I want to be able to send people a private link. So in order to send people private links, I have to have your email address. And then the other issue is that if I want to be able to reach you for other classes, like for marketing purposes, then I can also use the email address for that. So, but the security issue is by far the biggest issue. All right. So thank you everyone for joining me once again. And I hope to see some or all of you again in a few weeks when I'm going to be delighted to be in conversation with Martha Woodruff. So have a lovely September, and I hope to see you again. Bye-bye.